I want you to picture the kind of woman who does everything right. She shows up to every family dinner with a homemade dish, even when she worked a 10-hour shift. She remembers every birthday, every anniversary, every inside joke that means something to the people around her. She smiles through the passive-aggressive comments at Thanksgiving. She swallows her own needs like they're vitamins she doesn't really want, but knows are good for her. She tells herself that love is sacrifice, that family is patience, that marriage is hard, unglamorous, worth it work, and that any woman who gives up on it before she's tried everything is simply not trying hard enough. Now picture that woman realizing at 29 years old, standing barefoot in her own kitchen at 2 in the morning, while holding her husband's second phone, the one she found tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of a book he'd told her he reread every single year, that she was never building a life. She was building a stage set, and she was the only one who didn't know it was fake. That woman was me. My name is Claire, and this is the full story of how I lost everything I thought I had, and how I ultimately burned it down so completely that something real could finally grow in its place. I'll start at the beginning, because the beginning matters. The beginning is where all the warning signs were, the ones I told myself were charming, or normal, or just how his family is. The beginning is where I made the choices that led me to that kitchen floor. And I think the beginning is where any honest account of something like this has to start, not as because if I skip it, I become the narrator who only tells you the dramatic parts, and you never understand how a reasonably intelligent woman with a good job and functioning eyes ends up completely blindsided at 29. So, the beginning. I met Daniel when I was 22. I was fresh out of college, working my first real job at an accounting firm in the city, sharing a cramped apartment with 2 roommates and eating cereal for dinner more nights than I'd like to admit. I wore the same 3 blazers on rotation. I had approximately $400 in savings, and I thought that was fine because I was 22, and everything felt temporary and exciting and open. Daniel was 26. He was confident in a way that felt like sunlight, the kind of person who walks into a room and makes everyone in it feel slightly warmer just by being there. He had opinions about things. He was curious and funny and present in conversation in a way that a lot of people aren't. That quality of actually listening when you talk, rather than just waiting for you to finish so they can say their thing. He was also absurdly handsome. I don't say that to be shallow. I say it because it's relevant later, in a way that made me feel deeply stupid for not seeing it sooner. He had the kind of face that made people forgive him things before he even asked to be forgiven. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party on a Saturday night in late spring. He spent the whole evening talking to me like I was the only person there, which in retrospect is a skill, not a quality, but at 22, I didn't know the difference. He asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. He laughed at my jokes, real laughs, the kind that reach the eyes, not the polite variety that people produce to be kind. When the party ended, he walked me to the subway and asked if he could take me to dinner. By our 3rd date, I was already telling my roommates I thought he might be the one. I know. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. Those 2 years were genuinely wonderful. Or at least, they seemed that way at the time. And I think parts of them were real. And I've had to make peace with not knowing exactly which parts. He was attentive and romantic and thoughtful in the small ways that matter. He took me on weekend trips. He cooked elaborate meals on Sundays and left notes in my jacket pockets that I'd find days later at work. He introduced me to his friends like I was someone to be proud of, the way you introduce someone when you want people to like them because you like them. His family was a different story. I need you to understand the Morrisons before anything else in this narrative makes sense, because they are the texture under everything that happened. The invisible hand shaping the environment I lived in for 6 years, the force that gradually and systematically made me smaller until I didn't notice how small I'd become. His mother was Patricia. Patricia Morrison was the kind of woman who could make a compliment sound like a diagnosis. She had a gift, and I use that word in the darkest possible sense, for the phrasing that went in one direction on the surface and in the opposite direction just underneath. "Oh, Claire, you look so much healthier than last time," meant you look like you've gained weight. "Claire's just so independent," meant she doesn't actually need us, does she? Which in Patricia's value system was an accusation. "We always hoped Daniel would end up with someone more settled," was said directly to my face. At dinner, 3 months after the wedding, with a smile so warm and sweet it could rot your teeth. His father, Gerald, was quieter but in many ways worse, because Patricia was at least legible. Gerald communicated his disdain through strategic silence. He would ask Daniel questions about his life, his job, his goals, his plans. As though I wasn't sitting 18 inches away from his son at the same table. He would pause conversations mid-sentence when I entered a room, the way you pause something you don't want overheard. He called me Daniel's wife for a full year after the wedding before he used my actual name, and even then, it felt like a concession made reluctantly, under pressure. There were 2 siblings, a younger sister, Melissa, who genuinely seemed to like me for the first 6 months of my relationship with Daniel, warm, funny, actually interested in getting to know me, and who then pivoted gradually and completely toward her mother's position. So slowly, I barely tracked it happening until I suddenly looked up one day and realized that Melissa had not asked me a personal question in 8 months, and there was an older brother, Marcus, who was mostly absent from family life, living in another state, but who surfaced reliably at Christmas to drink too much scotch and say casually devastating things that everyone pretended not to hear. Family dinners with the Morrisons were elaborate, beautiful, exhausting performances. The table was always set perfectly. The food was always excellent. Patricia was a genuinely good cook, which was perhaps the most maddening thing about her. The flowers were always fresh. And underneath all of it, constant and low and unrelenting, was this hum of judgment and competition and unspoken scores being kept, alliances being maintained, hierarchies being performed. Every dinner left me feeling like I'd sat a test I hadn't been given the syllabus for. I tried for years to win Patricia over. I want you to understand the scale of the trying, because it wasn't passive hoping. It was an active, sustained, strategic effort. I learned her favorite recipes and cooked them for family gatherings. Not just adequately, I practiced them, refined them, made them better than she made them, and then was careful never to say so. I sent handwritten thank you notes after every dinner, every gift, every gesture. I remembered everything she ever mentioned she liked. A specific kind of tea, a particular author, a type of candle, and gave those things as gifts at appropriate moments. I laughed at her stories even when they weren't funny. I agreed with her opinions even when I found them wrong or unkind, because disagreeing with Patricia was considered an act of aggression in the Morrison family culture. When I hosted Christmas Eve at our house 3 years running and made it perfect every time, the food, the decorations, the gifts, all of it. You know what Patricia thought of me after 6 years of this? She told Daniel. And I know this because Daniel told me during one of our arguments, deploying his mother's words like a weapon because he was losing the argument and needed something sharp, that I was trying too hard, which meant I was clearly insecure, which meant I would never really be family. After 6 years. After 6 years of sustained, genuine effort. I cried in the bathroom for an hour after he said that to me, sat on the edge of the tub and cried until I was empty. Then I washed my face, put on a little makeup to cover the evidence, went back downstairs and made dinner. I set the table nicely. I poured us both wine. I did not bring it up again. That's who I was then. That's who I had learned, across years of small teachings, to be. The marriage itself, across those 6 years, had peaks and valleys. In the early years, more peaks than valleys. We had a genuinely good life by most external measures, a nice apartment we owned together, good jobs that were going well, I'd worked my way up to senior accountant at my firm. Daniel was in real estate development and doing well. Vacations twice a year, a solid social life filled with people I mostly liked. We cooked together on weekends and went on long walks and comfortably watched television. The kind of ordinary intimacy that is actually the substance of a shared life, unremarkable until it's gone. But things had been shifting. Not suddenly. Nothing dramatic happens suddenly, I've come to understand. And it happens gradually, in small movements, until one day the landscape is entirely different and you're standing in it, wondering when you crossed from the old terrain to the new. Things had been shifting for at least 2 years before I found the phone, and if I'm being honest with myself, for longer than that. Daniel started traveling more for work, not dramatically more, maybe 1 week out of every month, sometimes less, but more than before, and with a vaguer quality to the details. When I asked where he was staying or what client he was meeting with, I got short answers and subject changes. I told myself this was normal. People get busier as their careers progress. Work gets more demanding. This is life. He started going to the gym at unusual hours, early mornings when he'd never been a morning person, or late evenings after I'd expected him home. He'd always been reasonably fit, but there was a new quality to it, more deliberate, more particular, like someone performing maintenance for an audience rather than simply taking care of themselves. He bought new clothes, nicer than his usual, a better cut, more considered. I noticed but didn't say anything. He was doing well at work. People treat themselves. There was nothing to say. He got a new cologne. It sounds like a small thing. It was, probably. But I noticed it and then told myself I was the kind of paranoid woman who makes something out of nothing, so I stopped noticing it. He started spending more time on his phone. Not visibly more in the way that would be obvious. He didn't ignore me at dinner or disappear into his screen in a way that anyone could point to. But I began to notice that whenever his phone lit up, he would flip it face down in one smooth, practiced motion. It had the ease of something drilled, like the movement had become automatic. Our sex life didn't die, exactly. I want to be precise about this because I think the imprecision people use to describe these things lets everyone off the hook. It didn't die. It became transactional. Scheduled in feeling, if not in fact. Perfunctory. There was no presence in it. I would lie awake afterwards feeling lonelier than if we hadn't done it at all. And then I would tell myself that long-term relationships go through dry spells, that physical intimacy ebbs and flows, that I was being oversensitive. I asked him once, carefully, gently, whether something was wrong between us. We were on the couch on a Sunday morning with coffee, and I reached over and touched his arm and said, "Are we okay? I feel like we've been a little disconnected lately." Which was the mildest possible articulation of what I actually felt, which was, I feel like you are not really here, and I don't know where you actually are, and it's frightening me. He looked at me with an expression I have replayed many times since. It was not quite irritation, not quite guilt, not quite pity. It was all three of them together, blended into something I didn't have a name for at the time. Then he said, "You always do this. You catastrophize. Everything is fine, Claire. Can you just let things be fine?" I apologized. I said, "You're right. I'm sorry. I'll stop." And I did. I stopped. I pushed the thing I'd felt all the way down and labeled it anxiety, and medicated it with busyness and wine and the careful maintenance of a surface life that looked perfect from every angle that mattered to anyone watching. 6 weeks before I found the phone, something happened that I want to tell you about. Because it matters. It's the moment I think of when I wonder whether I should have known sooner. And the honest answer is that something in me did know. I just didn't let it get far enough up to the surface to breathe. Daniel's firm was having a client dinner, formal event, held at a hotel downtown, spouses invited. I bought a new dress, got my hair blown out, and went. I was doing the thing I'd become very good at, being the attractive, charming, easy to have around wife at a professional event, and the kind of woman who makes her husband look like he has his life together in all the ways that matter. At some point in the evening, I was waiting for Daniel near the bar while he talked to colleagues across the room. A woman came to stand beside me. She was in her early 30s, dark-haired, beautiful in a way that looked effortless. The kind of beautiful that makes you feel like you're the one who got dressed wrong. She ordered a drink. She glanced at me sideways, and something in her expression flickered for just 1 second before going smooth and neutral. "Are you Daniel Morrison's wife?" she asked. I said yes. "I'm Jade," she said. "I work with the Hartwell Group. We've worked with Daniel's firm a few times." "Nice to meet you," I said. She smiled. It was a careful smile. The kind of smile on a person who chooses every word. "You too," she said. "He talks about you." Something about the way she said it made my stomach turn over. Not the words themselves, the tone underneath them. Careful. Measured. Like someone picking their way through a conversation that has mines in it. I didn't know what to do with that feeling, so I swallowed it. I swallowed it the way I swallowed everything. When we got home, I told Daniel I'd met a woman named Jade from the Hartwell Group. I watched his face closely when I said it. Nothing moved in it. His face stayed perfectly still. "Oh yeah," he said. "I think I know who that is. She's done some work with us. Nice woman." "She said you'd talked about me," I said. He looked at me evenly and said, "I talk about my wife, Claire. Is that a crime?" That was the end of the conversation. I lay awake that night for a long time. And then I told myself I was making something out of nothing. I told myself I was exactly the kind of paranoid, catastrophizing woman he'd described. And eventually, I slept. 43 days later, I found the phone. It was a Wednesday. Daniel was away for work. 2 nights, clients in another city, a trip I had no particular reason to question. I couldn't sleep. Insomnia had become my baseline by this point. I was running on 6 broken hours a night, covering the evidence with concealer in the mornings, telling myself I was just going through a stressful period. I got up at 2 in the morning and went downstairs for water. I walked through the living room and past the open door of Daniel's study, the small room off the hallway where he kept books and occasionally worked from home. I had been in that room hundreds of times. There was nothing remarkable about it, except that something made me stop in the doorway. I have tried to explain this to people and have never quite managed to do it justice. It wasn't a sound or a smell or anything I could point to. Call it the accumulation of 2 years of things I hadn't let myself look at directly, finally applying enough pressure to break the surface. Call it whatever you want. I stopped in the doorway, and I looked at his bookshelf. There was a hardcover novel on the second shelf. A book he'd told me was his favorite. A book he claimed to reread every year. A book I had given him as a gift early in our marriage because I'd wanted to give him something that mattered to him. And this had mattered. I had never actually seen him read it, now that I thought about it. But I'd assumed he read it when I wasn't paying attention. I walked to the shelf. I took the book off it. It was too light. I opened it. The pages had been cut out, hollowed out into a box. Inside the box was a phone. A standard smartphone, nothing fancy, no case. It sat there in the hollow space where the story should have been. I turned it on. It wasn't locked. I am not going to describe in detail everything I saw on that phone. Some of it I'm still processing and don't have words for. Some of it I think would break me to write out explicitly, even now, even from the safety of enough distance. I will tell you the essential facts. The affair had been going on for at least 2 years. Her name was Jade. Yes, the woman from the work event. She worked for a client firm, not his company directly. Which was how he'd technically told a version of the truth when he told me she wasn't a colleague. They had hundreds of text messages, photos, emails, notes written to each other in a shared document they had named Ours. She had a nickname for him. He had a nickname for her. There were inside jokes I'd never heard, references to trips they'd taken together, trips that overlapped with his work travel, on dates I could place because I remembered him leaving, remembered him texting me from airports, remembered asking how the meetings went, and hearing about meetings that apparently hadn't happened. There was a hotel they returned to. The name was familiar to me. I had seen it on a credit card statement once, asked Daniel about it, and been told it was a client dinner. He had looked me in the eye and said those words, and I had believed him. There was a message from 3 months before that night. Daniel to Jade. He had written, "I know this is hard, but I'm figuring out the exit, just give me time." The exit? I was the exit. I was the thing he was figuring out how to get out of. I sat on the floor of his study for a long time, the phone in my hands, the hollow book beside me on the carpet. I didn't cry. I want to tell you I sobbed dramatically like someone in a film, but that's not what happened. There were no tears at all, which surprised me. I just sat there and felt something very large and very cold move through me, slowly, like cold water finding its way into every crack of a structure and beginning, quietly, to freeze. At some point, the cold became something else. At some point, I became very, very calm. I want to be clear about what that calm was. It was not the calm of peace or acceptance or transcendence. It was the calm of someone who realizes the building is on fire and understands, with total clarity, that panicking will only mean they don't make it out. It was a functional calm, a getting things done calm. I took my own phone from the pocket of my pajamas. I photographed everything on the second phone. Every message thread, every photo, every email, every note in their shared document. Systematically, methodically, until I had everything. Then I put the second phone back inside the hollow book, exactly as I'd found it, and replaced the book on the shelf in the exact position it had been. I went back to bed. I did not sleep. In the morning, I got up, showered, dressed, made coffee, poured 2 cups out of habit and left his on the counter, and then went to my car, sat in the driveway and called a lawyer. Her name was Sandra Okafor. She came recommended by my friend Priya, a friend who had been through her own divorce 2 years earlier and whom I had supported through it without ever imagining I would need the same. I called Priya first, from my car, and told her everything in about 9 minutes, keeping my voice as flat as I could manage given that it kept wanting to break. Priya was quiet through all of it. Then she said, "Don't do anything yet. Call Sandra today." And that was enough. Sandra Okafor was a woman who made you feel, within minutes of meeting her, that things were going to be handled. She was in her 50s, calm and precise, and with reading glasses on a chain and a habit of letting silences extend longer than felt comfortable until you filled them with something useful. She did not produce false warmth or unnecessary reassurance. She dealt in facts and options, which is exactly what I needed. I met her in person 2 days after finding the phone. I brought everything, printed screenshots, organized chronologically in a folder I'd labeled with a boring title in case Daniel ever saw it on my desk at home. Sandra looked through everything methodically without reacting. When she finished, she put the folder down, looked at me directly, and said, "Before we discuss options, I need to ask you one question. Do you want to save this marriage or do you want to leave it?" I didn't pause. "I want to leave it," I said. "I want to leave it, and I want to do it correctly." She nodded once. "Then here's what we're going to do." What followed was 6 weeks of quiet, careful, methodical preparation, the most controlled 6 weeks of my life, and also some of the hardest. Sandra walked me through the full picture. Because Daniel and I had significant shared assets, the apartment we owned together, 2 shared investment accounts, a joint savings account, a mortgage, and various other financial entanglements. The financial side was going to require careful handling. She wanted to bring in a forensic accountant before we filed anything. She wanted me to gather documents, tax returns, bank statements, mortgage information, investment account records, and any financial paperwork I had access to. She also told me something I wrote into my phone's notes app immediately, knowing I would need to read it again. The best thing you can do right now is not tip him off. Let him think everything is normal. Every day he acts normally is a day he isn't moving assets or consulting his own attorney first. So I did that. I maintained the performance for 6 weeks. I made dinners. I asked about his days. I kissed him hello when he came home. I slept next to him in our bed. I attended a birthday dinner for Patricia and smiled through 3 hours of her stories and gave her the compliments she required and left at a reasonable hour and cried in my car on the drive home and then went home and washed my face and went to sleep. I want to tell you this was easy because I was so angry that it overrode everything else. It wasn't easy. There were nights I lay in the dark next to him and felt a grief so enormous I genuinely couldn't breathe. A full-body suffocating weight of it. There were moments during ordinary days when something small would ambush me. A coffee mug he'd left on the counter, a show we'd watched together, a song from our wedding that came through my car speakers while I was driving to work. And I would have to lock myself in a bathroom stall for 10 minutes until I could function again. There was also running underneath all of that. Something harder. Something that burned low and steady. The anger was there. Not the hot, shaky kind that makes you cry and say things you regret. The slow kind. The kind that becomes fuel rather than fire. I was angry in a way that made me precise. During those 6 weeks, I did several other important things. I opened a new bank account at a different bank from any of our joint accounts and redirected my direct deposit there. I calculated what I needed for legal fees and immediate living expenses and set it aside. I found an apartment, a good one, small but exactly right, in a building I'd always liked when I walked past it, and paid the deposit and first month's rent. I told 4 people what was happening: Priya, my older sister Kate, my mother, and my closest colleague at work, a woman named Diana. These 4 people were my team. They knew everything. They kept my secrets. They were the group chat that kept me sane. I also checked the second phone one more time, carefully, near the end of those 6 weeks. I didn't read anything new. I already had everything photographed from the first time. I wanted to confirm I hadn't missed something important. What I noticed the second time was that the most recent messages had shifted in tone. Daniel was planning to ask me for a divorce. He hadn't set a date. He hadn't given Jade specifics. But the shape of the conversation had moved from someday to soon. He had written to her that he needed to handle some financial things first. Handle some financial things first. I told Sandra about that phrase. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the measured tone of someone who has heard this kind of thing before and knows exactly what it means. Then it's good that we're moving when we're moving. We filed the divorce petition 6 weeks and 2 days after I found the phone. Sandra recommended that Daniel be served at his office. She said it was cleaner, more controlled. She was right, professionally. I also had a small, human, petty part of me that found a private satisfaction in the image. His name called at his office, the papers delivered in front of his colleagues, the careful professional world he'd maintained around his double life, suddenly pierced by a process server with documents. I was at my desk when his paralegal texted me. He's been served. I put my phone face down and sat still for 60 seconds. Then I exhaled, picked up my coffee, and went back to the spreadsheet I was working on. Daniel called 17 minutes later. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring. He texted, "What is this, Claire? Call me." I texted back, "I'll be home at 6. He texted, "I need to talk to you now." I didn't respond. I drove home that evening with a mixture of dread and something I can only describe as relief. The secret was over. The performance was almost over. Whatever happened next, and I knew some of it would be terrible, at least it would be real. At least it would be the actual thing rather than the shadow version I'd been living in. Daniel's car was in the driveway. He was inside, on the couch, and when I walked in, he stood up so fast the coffee table shifted. His face was doing the thing it did when he was trying to control something and wasn't sure he could. "What is this?" he said, holding the papers. "Claire, what is this?" "It's a divorce petition," I said. I kept my voice even. I had rehearsed this. "I'm filing for divorce." "Why?" He looked, and I will remember this for the rest of my life. He looked genuinely confused. Not guilty. Not ashamed. Confused. Like this was something happening to him rather than a consequence of things he had done. "You don't tell me there's a problem? You don't try to work through anything? You just file? Without telling me anything?" "I've known for almost 2 months," I said, "since I found your second phone." His face changed. There it was. The thing that had been absent came flooding in all at once, and I watched it move across him. All the guilt he hadn't been performing a second ago, arriving late. "Claire," he started. "I know about Jade," I said. "I know it's been 2 years. I know about the hotel. I know about the trips, the ones during your work travel. I know about the document you two kept. I know what you called it." I paused. I held his eyes. "I know about figuring out the exit." Silence. "I'm the exit," I said. "I know that. I'm just ahead of you." What followed was not what I'd prepared for. I'd steeled myself for shouting, for denial, for accusations, for anger turned outward. What I got instead was something worse in its own way. Daniel sat back down on the couch like someone had removed the bones from him. He set the papers down. He put his face in his hands. He cried. Real tears, deep, ragged, the kind of crying that seems to come from somewhere below the chest. And something in me, this is the part I'm still most ashamed of, and most forgiving of myself for, because 6 years is 6 years. Something in me wanted to go to him. The impulse was physical. My feet almost moved. Almost. I made them stay still. "I'm so sorry," he said, through his hands. "Claire, I am so sorry. I still love you. I don't know how this happened. I don't know how I let it get this far. I never meant—" "You know exactly how it happened," I said. "You made choices. Hundreds of them. Over 2 years. You made them deliberately, with information, every single time." "I know," he said. "I know that. I'm sorry." "I don't need your sorry," I said. "What I need is for you to cooperate with the legal process Sandra has laid out. I need this to be straightforward. Can you do that?" He looked up at me. His eyes were red. He looked like the man I married and like a stranger at the same time, occupying the same face. And the feeling that produced in me was one of the loneliest things I've ever experienced. "Are you sure?" he asked. "There's no possibility of—" "You don't want to try." "Daniel," I said. "No." He cooperated. For the first 3 weeks, he cooperated. He moved into the guest room. He was quiet and careful around me, like someone navigating ice, which I understood was partly guilt and partly, I was certain, the dawning awareness that I had done this very deliberately and that I had things. Then Patricia found out. I don't know who told her. It may have been Daniel. It may have been Marcus or Melissa. It may have moved through their social network the way family news does. But approximately 3 weeks after the filing, Patricia called my cell phone on a Thursday afternoon. Sandra had told me early on to keep contact with Daniel's family to a minimum and to route anything significant through her. I knew this. I should have let it go to voicemail. I answered it anyway. "Claire." Patricia's voice was in management mode, the cool, precise register she used when something needed to be handled. Warmth layered over steel. "I think we should talk." "I'm not sure that's a good idea right now, Patricia," I said. "I understand you're upset," she said, with understanding so performative it was almost impressive. "But I think before you do something drastic, you should hear a few things." Against my better judgment, and I've spent time examining why, And I think the answer is that some part of me still wanted her approval even then, even at that moment, which tells you something about how thoroughly she had embedded herself in my sense of self-worth. I listened. What followed was a 20-minute call that I have since described to my therapist in detail more than once, because it was such a clean, complete illustration of how the Morrisons operated. Patricia told me, first, that Daniel's friendship with Jade had been misunderstood by me, and that it was a professional relationship that had gotten complicated, but was not what I was making it into. This was so thoroughly disproven by the documented evidence I was sitting on that I had to actively suppress a sound. Second, she told me that I had not been a sufficiently supportive wife, particularly given the level of work pressure Daniel had been under. That a woman who truly understood her marriage would have been asking herself what she had contributed to the distance between them. There it was. The framing. The reframe of his betrayal as a symptom of my failure. Delivered by his mother, about his affair, to his wife, on the phone. Third, she told me that divorce was a nuclear option I was choosing out of pride and stubbornness, and that I needed to be honest with myself about what I was throwing away. Fourth, and this is the one that made my body go cold in a way that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with recognition. She told me I should be realistic about what I thought I was entitled to financially, and that the Morrisons take care of their own, and that she couldn't promise Daniel wouldn't take a more aggressive approach in the legal proceedings if I insisted on being unreasonable. That was a threat, issued in a voice like cream over berries, but a threat in its structure and its intent. I said, "Patricia, I appreciate the call. My attorney will be handling all further communications." And I hung up. Then I called Sandra and repeated the entire conversation from memory. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Write all of that down tonight, as much detail as you can, with the time and date of the call. Do not delete it from your call log." She essentially threatened me, I said. "Yes," Sandra said simply. She did. And now we have that. After Patricia's call, Daniel retained his own attorney, a man named Philip Grenner, whom Sandra knew by professional reputation and described, with the considered precision of someone choosing her words, as aggressive. The strategy that emerged from Grenner's team over the following weeks was designed to minimize the settlement. The central argument was that Daniel had been the primary financial contributor to the marriage and that certain assets, specifically 2 of our 4 investment accounts, which had been established before the marriage, should be considered separately. They argued that my income and career trajectory should be weighed against any claim to the shared assets. They pushed back on the spousal support figure Sandra had calculated. It was a comprehensive, coordinated attempt to make me feel that fighting would cost me more than conceding. Around the same time, Daniel did something I want to tell you about because it mattered to me, and because I think it reveals more about who he actually is than anything else in this story. He contacted several of our mutual friends, people I had known for years, in some cases people I had known longer than I had known him, and got to them before I could. He told them his version. He was sad and contrite, and just really confused about what went wrong between them. He positioned himself as a man in a difficult marriage who had made a mistake, not as someone who had operated a systematic deception for 2 years while planning to leave his wife. He was good at this. He had always been good at being the warmth in the room. Some of those friends called me. Several came to me quickly and without hesitation, and I'm grateful for them. But some, including 2 women I had considered close friends, women I had sat with through their own hard times, women who had sat with me through mine, went quiet. When I reached out, they were vague and awkward in the specific way that tells you they've heard a story and they've made a choice. They'd chosen his narrative, or more accurately, they'd chosen not to get involved, which in practice meant they'd chosen him. That was, in some ways, harder than anything else. The affair was his. The deception was his. The friends disappearing. That one landed differently. Then came the dinner I hadn't expected. During the divorce process, a friend of ours, someone genuinely fond of both of us, trying her best to stay neutral, had a birthday celebration. I debated attending. I decided I would go because I refused to be the one who contracted, who disappeared from shared spaces. I had done nothing wrong. I would not act as if I had. I arrived to find that Daniel was there, with Patricia, with Gerald, with Melissa, with Marcus, who had apparently traveled from out of state. A family that did not road trip to a birthday dinner by accident. They were there as a unit, a display, to remind me, in a room full of people who mattered to both of us, that I was one person against a family. That the social weight of the Morrisons as a collective entity was something I would have to reckon with. Patricia found me within the first 15 minutes, because of course she did. She was all softness and warmth and arms reaching for mine. She steered me to a quiet corner with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this kind of steering her whole life. She said that the family had talked. She said they all agreed that Daniel and I should try counseling before giving up. She talked about legacy, what we'd built, what we'd be throwing away. She talked about commitment and what it means in the hard moments. She even, remarkably, invoked God, even though the Morrisons' relationship with organized religion was essentially non-existent, which told me precisely how hard she was reaching. I stood there and heard all of it. And when she finished, I said quietly, "Patricia, your son had an affair for 2 years. He planned to leave me. He called me his exit strategy. Counseling is not the appropriate next step for what happened here." Her face moved through several things quickly. "He made a mistake," she said. "He made hundreds of them," I said. "On purpose. Over 2 years. With full information about what he was doing. You're going to regret this," she said. And the warmth was completely gone now, and what was under it was exactly what I had always suspected was there. "You will regret throwing this family away." I looked at her for a moment, and I said, "Patricia, I have spent 6 years trying to be part of this family. You never wanted me in it. So, I think we both understand what is actually being lost here." I walked away from her. He got a glass of wine, found the birthday girl, and spent 40 minutes talking to her about her life, because it was her birthday, and she deserved a good one. I left at a reasonable hour. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 3 minutes with my forehead resting on the steering wheel. Then I drove to my apartment, made myself something to eat, and went to bed. Now I want to tell you about the forensic accountant, because this is where things shifted significantly and where I think the story becomes something other than just a sad story about a bad marriage. Early in the process, Sandra had recommended bringing in a forensic accountant, a woman named Renata, who specialized in examining the finances of marital estates during divorce proceedings. The fee was not small, and I was already managing legal costs, so I hesitated for approximately 36 hours before agreeing. It was the best money I spent across the entire process. Renata spent about 3 weeks working through everything: our joint accounts, our investment portfolios, Daniel's business accounts as they related to marital income, tax filings, credit card statements, the whole picture. What she found? Daniel had been moving money, not in dramatic amounts or sudden transfers that would draw obvious attention, in consistent, carefully sized installments, moved from our joint investment account to a personal account I did not know of, on a schedule, and in amounts that appeared designed to stay beneath reporting and notification thresholds. Over 8 months, the total moved this way was approximately $42,000. He had also been charging personal expenses, including what appeared to be travel, hotels, gifts, and restaurant bills, to a credit card I didn't know he had, paying that card from our joint checking account in amounts disguised by the merchant descriptions, labeled as business expenses, categorized under vendor names that were real but that had been used to camouflage the actual nature of what he was spending money on. And then, there was the bonus. 10 months before I found the phone, Daniel had received a significant performance bonus from his firm. I had known this bonus existed in a general way. He'd mentioned it. What I had not known was the amount, because he had deposited the entire sum into the hidden personal account without any of it going to our shared finances. The bonus was over $90,000. So, $42,000 removed gradually from joint investments, $90,000 in hidden income. An unknown additional amount in personal expenses was charged to a secret card over a period of at least a year. All of it carefully obscured. When Sandra and Renata laid this out for me in Sandra's office, I sat in my chair and felt a rage I don't know how to adequately describe. It was clean. It was total. Because this wasn't just the affair. The affair had already restructured who I understood Daniel to be. This was something on top of the affair. This was the discovery that while he was lying to my face about where he was, and who he was with, and what our marriage was, he had also been quietly, methodically, month by month, building himself a financial foundation for the life he was planning to have without me. He had been preparing his exit, and he'd been funding it with our money. While I cooked his dinners and attended his family's events, I told myself I was being paranoid and apologized for having instincts that turned out to be exactly right. Sandra said, "Courts take financial concealment seriously. This changes the landscape of what we can ask for considerably." "Good," I said. Philip Grenner's aggressive posture changed significantly when Renata's findings were formally introduced into the proceedings. Sandra had described to me in advance what this moment would look like. The particular recalibration that happens when a legal strategy collides with evidence it wasn't expecting. She was right. If the argument that Daniel had been the primary financial contributor to the marriage was considerably complicated by the documented fact that he had been secretly removing funds from the marital estate for 8 months. The hidden account, the bonus, the credit card. All of it documented, all of it presented, all of it sitting in the room like an immovable fact. Daniel's team revised their position, what we ultimately settled on, after months of a process that was difficult in its own procedural way, even after Grenner's strategy softened. The apartment. We had purchased it together, both names on the mortgage, and it had appreciated substantially. We agreed to sell and divide the proceeds, but the division was not 50-50. Taking into account the hidden funds, the undisclosed bonus, and the marital assets he had moved unilaterally, the final calculation came out in my favor at approximately 62% of the sale proceeds. The apartment sold for an amount I don't want to be specific about, but my share was more than I had walked into this expecting to receive. The investment accounts. The two established before the marriage were treated separately, as Grenner had argued. Sandra had agreed this was likely how the court would handle it, so we didn't fight that. The two established during the marriage were divided evenly. The $42,000 removed from the joint account was effectively clawed back into the marital estate calculation. The hidden bonus was treated as marital income that had been concealed, which further affected the overall picture in my favor. Spousal support for 3 years, monthly. Why at an amount that gave me room to breathe and make strategic professional choices rather than desperate ones. I walked away from my marriage with enough to buy my own home, clear every legal fee, establish a genuine financial safety net, and rebuild from a real foundation instead of a hollow one. Daniel walked away with significantly less than he had anticipated when he began handling some financial things and building his exit. The divorce was finalized on a Friday in late autumn. Sandra called to tell me, "It's done," she said. "Congratulations," or whatever the right word is for this. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." I was sitting in a coffee shop 2 blocks from my apartment. I sat with my phone on the table after she hung up and watched my coffee go cold. The shop was full of people having ordinary days, working on laptops, laughing with friends, waiting for their names to be called at the counter. The world was moving at its normal pace around me, while mine had just completed a full revolution. I thought about the woman I had been at 22, at a birthday party, feeling something beginning. Something had been beginning. Just not what I thought it was. I walked home slowly. It was cold, and the light was sharp, and the trees had turned, and the city was doing the beautiful autumn thing cities do. I let myself feel all of it. The grief and the anger and the relief, and the strange, disorienting lightness of no longer having to pretend. I want to tell you what happened to everyone, because I know that's what you're here for, and I understand why. Daniel and Jade are together. Openly, publicly, have been since shortly after the divorce. I know this because mutual friends mention it occasionally, not because I seek the information out. I have no particular feelings about it. Not the hot feelings anyway, not anymore. They found each other through an act of extended deception, and whatever they build together, they're building it on that foundation. I genuinely wish them clarity about what that means. Whatever they have is theirs to figure out. I have heard that Daniel tells people the divorce was mutual, and that things had broken down between them. I have not corrected this publicly. The people who know us both well know the truth. The people who don't know us well don't matter to me. Patricia sent me an email about a month after the divorce was finalized. And it was structured as an olive branch, warm in phrasing, suggesting I might want to stay in touch with the family given the years of history, expressing hope that I wouldn't be bitter. It was also, in its deeper architecture, a final small attempt at having the last word, at placing herself in the position of the magnanimous one extending grace. I read it once. I didn't respond. 4 months later, Melissa told me. Melissa, who had quietly and tentatively resurfaced during the divorce process with a short text that said simply, "I'm really sorry. I didn't know how bad it was. I feel terrible." That Patricia had been deeply hurt by my silence, that she felt the lack of response was rude. I found that I had very few feelings about Patricia's feelings. Melissa herself is a complicated thing. I didn't respond to her initial text right away. I sat with it for 2 days and then wrote back that I appreciated her saying so and needed some time. She said she understood. We have had a few careful, distant conversations since then. I'm not forcing it in either direction. Some relationships survive the wreckage and become something different and smaller and more honest. Maybe that one does. I'm letting it be what it is. Gerald and Marcus, I have not heard from you. I don't expect to. The two friends who went quiet both eventually reached out. One came back quickly, with a direct apology, and explained that she hadn't known what to believe and had made the wrong choice in her silence. I accepted it. We've been rebuilding that friendship slowly, and I think it will be okay. The other came back much later, there with an oblique and sideways apology that mostly asked me to understand how difficult the situation had been for her. I was kind about it. But that friendship is now a polite acquaintance, and I think we both understand that's what it is now. The ones who didn't come back at all, I've made my peace with it. You find out who people are in moments like this. That finding out is a gift, even when it's a painful one. It's real information about real things, and I would rather have real information than comforting fictions. Priya, the friend who gave me Sandra's name, who had been through her own fire and come out changed, became, through all of this, one of the most important people in my life. She knew exactly what it was because she had been through something adjacent. She didn't offer platitudes. She offered practical help. Honest company, and the particular solidarity of someone who has already survived the thing you're surviving. We have dinner every other week. She's one of my favorite people in the world. Diana, my work colleague, showed up in ways I had not expected and did not ask to be repaid for. She covered for me twice when I needed to leave work suddenly for legal appointments. She brought me lunch on days when I wasn't managing to feed myself. She sat with me through some bad hours without making them about herself. People like that are rare. If you have one, hold it. My life now. And I want to be careful here, because I don't want to wrap this with a bow that isn't real. I'm not going to tell you I've fully healed and feel wonderful every day. I'm not going to tell you I've found a new relationship and my faith in love is restored. You want because I haven't, and it isn't. Not yet. And I'm genuinely in no hurry about it. Healing doesn't move at the speed of narrative. It moves at its own speed, which is slower and less linear than any story can represent. What I will tell you is this. I live alone for the first time in my adult life. I have a small apartment that is entirely mine, decorated exactly as I want it, with no one to perform for or manage or bend myself around. I make my own decisions about every room, every object, every evening. The solitude, which I expected to be hard, has turned out to be one of the great discoveries of my adult life. I was promoted at work to senior manager 18 months after the divorce was finalized. Sandra sent flowers. Diana took me to dinner. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror that night and let myself feel proud of it. Which sounds small and isn't. I started running. Not to change my body. There is nothing wrong with my body. But because I needed something that was purely mine, that existed outside of any other person's opinion or approval, that had a clear and measurable result every single time I did it. I am slow. I do not care about being slow. I run 3 mornings a week, and every single time I finish, I feel like something true has happened. I've been in therapy weekly since before I even found the phone. My therapist is a woman in her 60s who asks very precise questions and rarely tells me what to think, and the work I've done with her has changed how I understand myself in ways I'm still uncovering. If you take one practical thing from this story, let it be this. If you can access it, do it. It is the most important investment I have made in myself. More than the legal process, more than the financial outcome, more than any of the external things. The internal work is the whole thing. I want to say the thing I think the whole story is actually about. Because it's not about the affair, really, or the money, or even the Morrisons, though all of those things matter and are part of it. It's about what I had learned to do for myself. I was raised, not in words, but in everything around me growing up, with the understanding that a good woman is a peaceful woman. Accommodating, patient, and willing to absorb discomfort quietly in the service of maintaining harmony for the people around her. I was taught that a woman who disrupts things, who insists on her own needs, who refuses to smooth things over, who walks away from something that isn't working, is difficult, selfish, not a team player, not wife material, not someone who understands that love requires sacrifice. I carried all of that into my marriage. I carried it into every interaction with Patricia, who had identified it within 6 months of knowing me and used it with surgical precision for 6 years. I carried it into my own silence every time my body told me clearly that something was wrong, and my mind talked my body out of it. I chose the performance over the truth, over and over, because the performance was what I'd been trained to value. My instincts were right, the whole time. Every moment I felt something was off. Something was off. Every moment I dismissed my own perception, I was choosing other people's comfort over my own clarity. The 6 years of peace I maintained cost me 6 years of my life. The disruption I finally chose cost me a few hard months. I know which one I would choose again. There are a few questions I get asked consistently, so I'll answer them here. Did I confront Jade directly? No. I considered it. I decided against it. Jade is not the person who made a vow to me. She behaved badly. Participating knowingly in a sustained deception is not something I'm inclined to excuse. But she was not my husband. He was my husband. Confronting her would have given me a moment at the cost of my own dignity, and I decided early on that my dignity was worth more than that moment. Did I tell Daniel's employer about the affair? No. His personal life is not mine to weaponize professionally. I had no interest in doing anything that could complicate my legal standing or give him reason to characterize me as vindictive. The legal process handled everything that needed handling. Do I regret how I handled it? I regret that it happened. I regret the 6 years. I wish I had trusted myself sooner. But from the moment I found the phone, I handled it as well as I was capable of handling it, and the outcome reflects that. Am I still angry? Some days, yes. The anger doesn't disappear fully. My therapist tells me the goal isn't to make it go away, but to understand what it's telling me and integrate it rather than either drowning in it or pretending it's not there. I'm working on that. Most days it's manageable. Some days it surfaces. I let it. I don't perform my way through it anymore. Did I love him? Yes. Genuinely, for years. And that's part of what makes it hard. It would be cleaner if the marriage had been hollow from the start. I don't think it was, though I've had to make peace with never knowing exactly which parts were real and which parts were a performance he was giving me. That uncertainty is something I carry. It gets lighter over time. About 6 months after the divorce was final, my therapist asked me to write a letter to Daniel that I would never send. She said it was an exercise for closure. Not for him, for me. I've never shared it with anyone. I'm going to share a piece of it here, because it says something I've struggled to say any other way. I wrote, "You told me once, early in our marriage, that the thing you loved most about me was that I always showed up. That I was the kind of person who did what she said she would do. You said it like it was a compliment, and I took it as one. I understand now that you were also telling me, without meaning to be that clear about it, why you chose me. You chose me because I would show up. I would perform. I would maintain the surface. I would choose the marriage over myself, again and again, because that is what I had been taught to do, and what you needed me to do for your life, to work the way you wanted it to. I was the stable backdrop for the life you wanted to live in the foreground. I spent 6 years being grateful to be chosen by you. I understand now that I was the one who should have been choosing. You were not a gift given to me. I was not lucky to have you. You were lucky to have me. And you didn't know it, or you knew it and took it for granted, which is worse. I don't hate you. I don't wish you harm. I'm what I feel, when I let myself feel it clearly, is sorry. For both of us. For the years we both lost to a lie, even if you were the one who built it. I hope you figure out why you did what you did, because I don't think you actually know, and I think that gap in your self-knowledge will keep costing you things until you close it. I hope I become, eventually, the person I was before I learned to make myself small. I think I'm getting there. 3 months ago, I was running in the park near my apartment. Early morning, maybe 7, light coming in low and gold the way it does when autumn is almost over but hasn't let go yet. I was at the 2-mile mark, which is the place where I always want to stop but never let myself anymore. My lungs were protesting, my legs were protesting, the old version of me, the one who made herself small, who absorbed discomfort quietly, who always had a reason why stopping made sense. She would have listened to those protests, would have slowed down, would have told herself it was fine to stop. I kept running. About a minute later, the protests quieted, the way they do when you don't give them what they're asking for. The discomfort didn't disappear, but it became bearable, and I found a rhythm, and for the next 20 minutes I ran through that park in the early gold morning and felt something I don't have a perfect word for. Not happy with the way, not content with the told myself way. Something realer than both of those. Something that didn't need an audience and wasn't for anyone else. I finished the run. I stood at the edge of the park, hands on my knees, catching my breath. Then I stood up straight and looked at the morning. Hun went home. If you've read this far, thank you. I mean that. The short version, for those who need it: married 6 years, found my husband's secret phone, discovered a 2-year affair and 6 figures in hidden assets, spent 6 weeks preparing in silence, filed for divorce, brought in a forensic accountant who changed the financial landscape entirely, walked away with a settlement that reflected what I was actually owed, lost some friends and gained clarity about them, and am slowly and genuinely and imperfectly rebuilding a life that belongs to me. For anyone who's in the middle of something like this, I see you. The middle is the hardest part. It does not stay in the middle forever. Keep going. Claire.